It says we're on mute. We'll see what's going on. There it is. Wow. Good morning, Rabbi. Everyone on Zoom here, okay? Got the thumbs up from Zoom. Got the thumbs up from the audience. I hope you guys can hear, okay? Today's daf is Pesachim Ayin Hey, and it is a pleasure to teach this amazing daf. We've just started a parak Ketzad Solin. Let us start with our sponsors for Thursday. We have a Talmud Torah sponsorship by the Elbaum family for the recent yahrzeit and memory of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kifel, Ben Avraham Menachem Zal, loving father of Avron, Sean, and Judah Elbaum, and loving husband of Shirley Elbaum. May his memory be a blessing and remain eternal in our hearts. And by Bracha Strimber, in loving memory of Avi Strimber, Avraham Ben Kalman Eliezer Levi Zal, on his 9th yahrzeit. We have a week of learning sponsor by Gail and Doug Stanger in honor of their grandson Etiel Mordechai Weinberg, who will become a bar mitzvah in Parshas Yisro and also be called the Torah Shvat 23 morning minyan Baruch Hashem, so that in this unprecedented time family members can share in this Simcha Mazel Tov. And by Moshe Devorah Wordesheim for Refuah Shlema for Yara Golit Bas Shai Etzel. We also have a Daf Yomi sponsorship by Bobby and Lisi Lilienfeld in honor of the birthday of their son Yosef. Mazel Tov Yosef. And by Michael and Rachel Terniansky in commemoration of the 2nd yahrzeit of Rachel's brother, Levi Delman, Aryeh Leib, Shaya ben Avraham Yitzchak, Hersha Levi, Zal. Thank you to all our sponsors for helping us bring the Daf Yomi to the entire world and to all of Baltimore. So Baruch Hashem, we are at the top of Ayin Hey, which is Alav Shalom, so it's appropriate for some of the sponsorships. And we have started the parak of Ketzad Solin. How do we make a barbecue of our Korban Pesach? So all of our barbecue experts are waiting for the snow to melt and the weather to get a little better so we can fire up the grill and roast our Zecher, the Korban Pesach. But we saw yesterday, we don't want to make it like a Korban Pesach exactly, because then someone might make a mistake. Instead of saying Zecher, the Korban Pesach, they'd say Zeh Korban Pesach, and then they'd be eating Kodshim B'chutz. This is a reason why during the Pesach Seder, we say that the shank bone, the zroa, is a zecher, the Korban Pesach, but we don't point at the bone when we say that. We point and say that this is the matzah, this is the maror. But if you look at some of the footnotes and some of the Haggadot of Pesach, they say don't point to the zroa, because someone might say zeh Korban Pesach instead of zeh zecher, the Korban Pesach, and that zecher and that zeh, they do make a difference. We mentioned yesterday the famous Todos Ish Romi. Todos in Rome had them roasting a lamb on Pesach as a zecher, and the other sages got mad at him and said that you're close to bringing Am Yisrael to making a mistake and accidentally consecrating Kodshim B'chutz. So you have to be careful about roasted meat on Pesach. We mentioned yesterday, halacha l'maisa, we do not roast any kind of meat for our Pesach Seder, for our Seudah. But if somebody, we saw also Baraisa, if it was boiled, then it wouldn't be considered roasted. So the Eitzah in some of the Mefarshim, some of the poskim, they bring down, if a woman accidentally roasted for Pesach Seder, that you could fix it by going ahead and cooking it, boiling it after, doing something else, so it's not simply roasted, it also has something else done. So good, we're at the top of Ayin Hey at the 2 dots, Ein Solin Es Pesach. So going back to our Mishnah, what is this actually going on? It says, Ein Solin Es Pesach, Lo Al Shvud, not on a metal stick. Remember, we used a stick made of pomegranate wood, which is why if I were in charge of JNF right now, I'd be planting pomegranates all over Eretz Yisrael. If you're zocher to make aliyah, plant some pomegranates, please. We're going to need a lot of them. So we don't do it on the shvud of metal. We use pomegranate instead, velo ala askala, and not on a grill. So we're going on this lo ala askala business. We say maise listor, because what's going on in the Mishnah? We say we don't use an askala, and then immediately after that, we say Amar Rabbi Tzadok maase. But Rabban Gamliel Shomer LaTavi Avdo, he said to Tavi, his famous Talmud Chacham slave, Save it solilanu as a Pesach al Askala. Go roast us up the Korban Pesach on the grill. Remember, we mentioned yesterday that according to some, the Netziv and the Rav Yaakov Emden and others, this was after the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Remember, we spoke out that there was this whole discussion if you could bring a Korban Pesach after the Churban, and it appears that they did. So if this was really a Korban Pesach, then why is he using a grill? The Gemara here says, Maise Listor. We usually have a Maase. This is not a Baba Maise. This is a real Maase, like Halacha la Maase. So we usually have a story and an illustration to prove the Mishnah, not to be soser, not to be listor, not to undermine or contradict the Mishnah. Hasoi mechasra, there's something missing from the Mishnah. Hachitani, this is how you should teach it. So what happened is different explanations what it means. Hasoi mechasra, something's missing. Would they really have a Mishnah that's missing? Perhaps when they compiled the Mishnayot, there were different versions. There's different ways to teach the Mishnah, different baraisot, which were outside of the Mishnah, and maybe they had started learning a version with these words missing, and then they realized it would be better to use the words, or at least to have the Talmidim learning the Gemara to put in these words when they were explaining it. Hachitani, this is how you should teach it. Im askala minukevet, if it is a holy askala, if it's a grill with a gap, not a grill that's where the metal is tight together, but it has quite a bit of spacing, mutter, that would be mutter. The Rashi here explains, he says, yesh cholo gadol, there's actually a very large gap, bein bariach lebariach, between one pole to the next of this grill. V'notin shfud l'rachbo, so you're actually, the carbon pesach is not directly on the grill, but it's on the shfud, it's on the stick of pomegranate wood, v'kol tzlei nitzla ba'avir. Shebein Shnei Berichim. And he says the entire Pesach is actually not touching the metal grill. You're actually using the metal grill to hold up the spit. She'ein Basar Nogei B'Barzel. So now that your animal, your carbon Pesach, is not actually touching this grill, you're just using the beams of the grill as a place to put your shvud of rimon. So now instead of having it standing up in the fire, it's going across the fire. So Rashi is saying it doesn't touch the metal at all. The Rambam actually says it could touch the metal, but we're dealing with it's widely spaced, so the fire will get in between. It's not a tight grill, with the metal close together. It's got a lot of spacing. So the Rambam would allow even to touch the metal. The Ravid says that's kind of an issue with the next Mishnah. We're going to see it shouldn't be touching anything, but the Rashi says definitely it's not touching. Good. So that's all about grilling, so we can get ready to fire up our grills when the snow melts. Amar Rabbi Tzadok, Meiser, Rabbi Gamliel, Shamal Tavi Avdo. So he's repeating the Mishnah. Say Tzalilano Esa Pesach ala Askala Minu Keves, on a holy grill, a grill with wide spacing. According to Rashi, wide enough that it doesn't touch. According to the Rambam, wide enough spacing for the fire to really get in there and do its work on the carbon Pesach, so we can call it Sli Eish, and not that the metal's being heated up and the metal is roasting. So we saw yesterday that was the problem of using a metal stick. Ba'imene Rav Chinina bar Idi me Rav Ada bar Chava. So he has this question: a tanar shehesika b'klife orla, an oven that you fired up your oven with the shells of orla. You've used some kind of orla wood, orla fruit, as we understand. Orla is the fruit of the first 3 years, and you're not allowed to eat it. But what about if you had orange peels or nut shells or whatever it is? The klipim, the shells of orla, and you fired up the oven. Now remember, in the second parak already, we saw this was a problem. If you baked your matzah in such an oven that was fired up with shells of orla, then it would be usr. Now then they said, what if it was orla and something else? Maybe it was the famous concept zeh v'zeh gorem. This and this are causing it. They're causing it together. If it was mutter firewood and orla together, there were some who were matir it because zeh v'zeh gorem. And they said, what if you fired the oven for the first time with orla? And we know the first time you fire an oven, this is a clay oven, that first firing sort of solidifies and hardens the oven, so it's sort of the makeh b'patish, the final step in making the oven. So now there was an opinion that the entire oven should be shattered and smashed. You can't use it because you've used orla to sort of create that oven. So anything after that would be relying on the orla. So in this case, you've fired up your oven with orla, the garfo, and then you swept out the coals. You swept out this orla fuel. So now you have a hot oven with no fuel inside, no orla inside, but it's still hot. And then you stuck your pita bread, to the side of this oven, and it's still hot. It's hot enough to bake your bread, but there's no more orla in it. The divriya oser, to the one who says it was usher to do so back in the second parak, that such bread was not mutter to eat. Mahu, what would be the din if you had swept it out already? Amar le pat muteret. So now if you don't have the orla firewood inside, you're just relying on the heat in the oven, so the bread that you bake in such an oven would be mutter. The firewood's not there anymore. Amar le, so he said back, V'ha'amar Rav Hinan the Sava, Rav Hinan the elder said, Amar Rabbi Yasi, the Rabbi Yasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Taner shehisiku, an oven that you fired it up, Vigarfu, and then you swept out all the firewood, all the burning sticks and embers and coals. V'tzila bo'es a Pesach, then you roasted your Pesach in such an oven, ein zeh tzli eish. this is not really tzli eish. So before I go on, garfu is a lashon we had in the Gemara in Shabbos. Remember, in the third parak of Shabbos, we talked about all the different ovens and the different shaped ovens, the cone oven, the rechayim, and the double oven. And we said that there was a heter on Shabbos to leave your food on the stove if it was garuf, if it was swept out. So this is the exact same process we're talking about. You fired up the oven, you got it hot, and then for Erev Shabbos, if you already swept out the coals or you covered the coals, it would be mutter to leave the food on Erev Shabbos to keep it warm. You could leave your chicken soup on because if the coals are swept out, you can't stoke the coals. The problem of leaving the food on the fire is you could stoke the coals, or in our case, perhaps adjust the knobs. So if the knobs are covered up, we say that's like grufa ketuma, or if you swept out all the coals, you can't stoke the coals anymore, so that's garf. That's the same word here, garfu. You swept out all the coals, swept out all the firewood. Vitziluas a Pesach, ein zeitzleish. It's not a tzleish anymore because there's nothing on fire anymore. It's hot. The oven's hot enough to roast, but it's not. It doesn't have a fire in it. Shnamar tzleish shtei pa'amim. It says in the Torah, you have to roast it in the fire in two different places. Two different psukim tell us to roast the korban Pesach in the fire, and this isn't the fire; it's in a hot oven. Taima de goli rachmana tzleish. So the reasoning is the Torah revealed to us tzleish shtei pa'amim. Twice. So we really need tzli eish. We need an actual open burning fire inside of we need the burning fuel inside the oven. Halo gale rachmana. If the Torah had not revealed this to us, hava mina tzli eshu, we would have thought this is a tzli eish. That even oven heated up, but then garuf swept out. There's no burning fuel in there. Amalei gale rachmana chasam says the Torah reveals that they're a korban Pesach. You'll feel it mina, and we learn out of Pesach. So too for the Orla case. Or you could say, Chasam taima de kasav rachmana tzli eish shtei pa'amim. There by korban Pesach, it has to tell us we roast it on the fire twice. Halo kasav rachmana tzli eish shtei pa'amim, because if the Torah hadn't told us you roast on tzli eish Pesach on the fire twice, havamina aish kapid rachmana, that the Torah is makpid on eish, on having an actual flame. Afilu garfu, of having eish, having the heat of fire. Afilu garfu, even if you'd swept it out, then maybe that would be okay for a korban Pesach. So the Torah has to write tzli eish twice, so we know that afilu garfu nami is not tzli eish, because you've taken out the fuel, the burning fuel is out of the oven, it's just a hot oven, okay, it's hot enough to roast, but you need the actual fuel burning under the korban Pesach. Afilu garfu nami tzli eish hu. You would have thought that, you would have thought that even if you swept it out, it's a tzli eishu, it's considered tzli eish. Avol hacha. But here, by the case of orla, you've heated up your oven with orla, and then you've swept out the orla fuel that's burning. The Torah is makbid that we don't use orla. Orla is an isur hana. You have to bury it. You have to get rid of it, flush it. You can't use it at all. So 18 desura kapid rachmana, where the Torah is particular that we do not use this wood. Haleisnahu, and now it's not here anymore. So now you've swept it out of the oven. You have a hot oven. Okay, the oven got hot. Else the orla, but you have a hot oven, the maisa, you could bake your bread in it because the orla is not here. Tana Rabbanan chatchu. So here's a different way to prepare the Pesach. Tana Rabbanan. In the Brisa we taught chatchu. You cut up your korban Pesach, but not new al gabei gocholim. When you put it on coals. Rebbe Omer, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he says, Omer ani. I say shezei tzli eish. He says I say this counts as a tzli eish. We saw before, it would usually put on a stick, and the stick was put into the burning coals, and the coals would roast it. And here he's saying you cut it and put the meat directly on the coals. He said that's good enough for tzli eish. Now this lashon omer ani is strange, and if you've been counting, it appears 15 times in Shas. I didn't count; I had to look it up. In Rav Yosef Engel, he explains omer ani is a lashon anava. It's like saying in my humble opinion. We know that Rebbe was a very humble man, even though he was very rich and a big Talmud Chacham and the leader of the community was very humble. He says, Omer Ani. And there's actually these words, Omer Ani, appear one other time in Tanakh. They appear in Tehillim Mem Hey, when David the Melech says, Omer Ani Masai Melech. He says, I say my actions are for Hashem's sake, and I will be Eit Machir, I will be a swift scribe. And that's a remez, according to Rav Yosef Engel, it was a nevuah that David the Melech had, that one of his descendants, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a descendant, direct descendant of David HaMelech, would have to do something, l'shem shemayim, and write something down. It says, Omer ani ma'asai l'melech, my action is for the king, I will be a swift scribe. This is referring to the Kesiva of the Mishnah. It was a nevuah. In Tehillim, there's a nevuah of David HaMelech that his descendant would write down something, and it wasn't. It's, you understand, Torah Shabbat Pei shouldn't have been written down, but it was also all the, the deprivations and the persecutions that were going on in Roman times after the Churban, that they decided we need to start compiling the Mishnayot, writing them down, having a unified corpus of halacha that will go with the Jews everywhere in Galut, into every country. We'll have the same Mishnayot everywhere. Baruch Hashem, that was that saved the Jewish people, to have the same Torah. We didn't have a temple anymore. We had the same Torah, the same Mishnayot was compiled, and now the same Gemarot are learned every single day, every country in the world, every place in the world. We have Daf Yomi every day, uniting the Jewish people. So this was Omer Ani. That's the only reference, Omer Ani, in Tanakh, is this pasuk, which is David HaMelech's nevuah about Rebbe, according to Rav Yosef Engel. Can't make this up. It's Rav Yosef Engel. So he says, Omer Ani, Zaytzli Eish, if you put the meat directly on the coals. Ramile, we have a contradiction to this. Rav Achadvai brings a kasha on him. Bar Ami, the Rav Chisda, he says, Mi Amar Gabi Gecholim Eishnehu. Are you going to tell me putting it directly on the coals is considered Eish? Is it Tzli Eish? Minhu. We'll compare from a brisa about Nigaim, about some of the tsaras, some of the spots that they see in people were from a burn. Michvas Eish, a burn from fire. Ainli Elish Nechva B'Eish. I would only know that this refers to mamish, a fire. Nechva B'Gechelis, what if it's from coals? Beremitz, or from hot ash. B'Sidroteach, or sid is it's like they use for plaster. It's like a lime kind of plaster substance that's boiling. Begifsis roseach, a gypsum that's boiling. Kol davar ba min ur, anything that is heated up by fire, not just fire itself, anything heated up by fire. Lesuya chame, or even boiling water, even hot water. Minayin, how do you know this counts as a michvah eish? Talmud lomar, michvah riba. A burn and a burn is riba. So it's michvah eish, and then the end of the pasuk says michvah again. So any kind of burn that's been caused by something heated up by fire, not just fire itself, counts as a burn. Riba. Taima de Rabbi Rachmana michvah. So the reasoning we include it is because the Torah added the word michvah, as michvah twice, a burn twice. So any burn from heat counts for tsaros. Halo Rabbi Rachmana michvah. Gechalim lavation in who? We would have thought coals are not fire. We're talking about not coals with a fire blazing out. We're talking about hot coals. So we would have thought that's not a valid fire. And this is a problem for Rebbe, who says you could put the Korban Pesach directly on the coals. He says coals made of wood doesn't require a puzzle. Coals made of wood, they're burning. They're made of wood. They're compacted, pre-burnt wood, and now they're burning, so it doesn't need a pasuk, the Rabbiye. Because we understand burning wood is the epitome of fire. So we don't need to include that. That's obviously a fire. We need it for any gechelis, any kind of coal, any kind of heated up substance which is made of metal. So you're telling me that something heated up, a metal that's heated up, molten metal, is not fire? Hagabe bas Kohen, but what kind of punishment does a bas Kohen shezinsa, that she committed adultery, get? She gets a very bad punishment, as we learned in Sanhedrin just 2.5 years ago. In the fire we burn her. Amar Rav Matna, what Rav Matna explains, that this is not literally, we do not throw the bas Kohen shezinsa on the fire. What happens is batila shel aver hayu osinla. They made a wick of lead. They prepared a molten lead, shiny chasam, and actually poured the lead into her mouth. And the sreifa was done, we're going to see, from inside out. Shiny chasam, that's different by the bas Kohen. Amar kra ba'esh tisaref. In the fire she shall be burned. So tisaref, l'rabos kol sreifa sabas min ha'esh. So this word tisaref, she shall be burned. So it's not just ba'esh tisaref. In the fire, she will be burned. So she'll be burned with something that comes out of the fire, which is this molten lead. Kol sheken eish atzma. And kol sheken and kal v'chomer, you could use eish atzma, fire itself. So eish tisaref, even something heated up by fire, not just fire itself. So why don't we surround her with bundles of vines, which are highly flammable, v'nikle, and they will light it up if we could just use fire itself. Why do you go to the trouble of melting down lead to pour in? Asya sreifa maybe the Aharon, because you learn burning from the sons of Aharon. This is the first two sons, Nadav and Avihu. Malahalan sreifas neshama v'guf kayim. So just by the sons of Aharon, what happened was their neshama was burnt up, and their goof was still there. Their body was still there. That's why they had to be carried out of the Kodesh Kodashim after, you remember, Nadav and Avihu went in to offer Keturis without being commanded. And Hashem took them for doing this. Afkan sreifas neshama v'guf kayim. So too, we by the Bas Kohen Shazinsa, we burn her from the inside out. We don't burn from the outside in. We burn from the inside out by using this hot lead. So there's an amazing hara and about Nadav and Avihu, and I actually have notes. It's so good. This is something that when we were learning Shmini last year, I would say this is my Torah, but this is Hashem's Torah that Hashem chose to reveal through me. It's got nothing to, it's Hashem's Torah. It's good. So this is what Nadav and Avihu did. They went in there and they offered incense, offered ketoris without being commanded to do so. And the Gemara says, what was their sin? Well, they were mora halacha. They didn't ask the Rebbe. They made a decision by themselves to go in and do that. There's another reason they had been drinking. They drank wine. And another reason they didn't get married. So Hashem revealed to me these are all the same reason. It's all the same reason. It's one big reason. And what they did was they didn't get married. They didn't start a family because they held themselves out as being not ready. They weren't ready to get married. There's an amazing Gemara, and it's in Kiddushin 29b. And it says, Tana Rabbanan Lilmod Torah Velisa Isha. Are you going to learn Torah or get married? Yilmod Torah. Learn Torah first. Achar kach Yisa Isha, and then get married. V'im ef sharlo below Isha. He can't go on without a wife. He has, you understand, bodily desires. Yisa Isha, so he should get married. Achar kach Lilmod Torah, and then he'll learn Torah with a clear mind because there's a healthy outlet. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha nosa Isha v'achar kach Lilmod Torah. He says, really, you should. He advises Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, you should get married and then learn Torah. And then Rabbi Yochanan replies, this is famous. He says, Amar rechayim b'tzavara v'yaslik b'Torah, with a millstone around your neck, you're going to be busy in Torah? How could you get married and start a family and be osik, put all your energy into Torah? By definition, if you're married and you're starting a family, you can't put all your energy into Torah. By definition, you can't do that. It's a millstone, says Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara answers, Halon halahu. So one is for Bavel, one is for Eretz Yisrael. And they bring, Mefarshim there, explain that in Bavel, they would get married and then make a Sheva Brachas Mazel Tov, and the Chazan would leave. He'd go to Eretz Yisrael and learn Torah, for a year or two or three, depending on the financial situation. And the families of the Chazan and Kola would support the bride and the groom also while he's away in Kola, but they support her. She wasn't even in the same country. So he was free to learn Torah. He was married, Baruch Hashem, but he was free to learn Torah completely because his wife was taken care of. In Eretz Yisrael, they were poorer, so they would learn Torah first and then get married later once they had achieved something in Torah. But in either event, the idea is that a young man has to find his own voice in Torah. He has to find his own hashkafat ha'chaim. He has to find his direction in life. Before he gets married, he has to have some Torah under his belt. He has to have some life experience. He has to become a man who can be the leader of a wife and children, be the leader of a family. That's in either event, in either place. That's the pshat, is a boy can't just be a little boy. He has to make something of himself. He has to start becoming a man before he's thinking about getting married. And you understand, in our generation, this could be a little later. So maybe he wants to go to a year in Eretz Yisrael first. Maybe he wants to go to college first. Some even want to go to grad school first or med school first. Understand, it's a little different. In any event, a man has to become something before he wants to go get married. He has to be something before he can be a leader to a wife. Nadav and Avihu said, we're not ready. We're not leaders. We haven't learned enough Torah. We haven't become the high level we need to in Avodas Hashem that we can think about leading a wife and raising children. We're not ready. That's why they didn't get married. But what did they do? They were mora halacha bifnei Rabbo. They ignored Moshe and Aaron, and they made a decision to bring the Ketoris, which shows they thought they were ready. So they were holding themselves out externally as saying, we're not ready, we're unworthy, we're still Talmidim, we're still too young, we're not ready to have a wife and children. But then they made this decision without Moshe and Aaron to go into the Kodesh Kodashim, to bring Ketoris without Hashem asking. And not only that, they drank wine first to show that they could do an avoda even when they were a little distracted, a little intoxicated. So it's soser. It's tochu lo kabaro. The inside was not like their outside. On the outside, they're saying we're not ready, we're too humble, we're too low, and then they went into the Kodesh Kodashim, and so they say we are ready to connect to Hashem. So it was the contradiction, and this is why they were punished. So it's all one reason. It's all one reason. They didn't get married, but they still paskin halacha without the Rebbe, and they still drank wine before they did this avoda. So that was contradictory. That's why they were punished. Understand, if they were married, their wives probably would have said, don't do that, don't do that. That's a bad idea. So that they would have been saved from that by the chachmas nashim bansa baisa, the wisdom, the everyday wisdom, practicality of women. It would have been a moderating factor in their spiritual fire. You understand? They were very holy. That's why Hashem took them. They were miktashai tiktashu. They were the holiest ones there because they were so attached to Hashem. And this is again why their neshama was burned up. Their neshama was burned and their goof was still there. Their neshama was totally attached to Hashem, but their goof, since they never got married and had children, wasn't being used fully for avodas Hashem yet. So their goof wasn't burnt up, only the neshama, because only the neshama level was attached fully to Hashem and not the goof. So Hashem revealed that. That's in Shmini over there. So that's why we learn from them to the sota, why we do the fire from the inside and not the outside. Good. Guf kayim navi lo chamea or. So why don't we make for her a very hot fire? Bishum de Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Kra. Rav Nachman says, ve'havta l'reicha kamocha. Famous pasuk, ve'havta l'reicha kamocha, zei kol gala b'Torah. What does Rav Nachman say? It means, barala misa yafa, give your friend a good death. Ve'havta l'reicha kamocha means give him a good way to die, not so much pain. We don't want to burn the person alive and from the outside, and it's horrible. And you understand, we want them to die. You understand, they're a sinner and they're chayiv misa. They have to die. The Sanhedrin is paskind, but we don't want it to be painful and agonizing and embarrassing. So since we have Rav Nachman, why do you need to compare them to the Bnei Aharon who were burned from the inside out? We're not comparing them to Bnei Aharon, the not of an Avihu. Havamina, Streifas Neshama V'guf Kayim Love Streifahui. We would have thought that's not a valid way to be executed by Streifa, to have the inside burned and the outside still there. And if we're using the reasoning of Rav Nachman, it should be a Misa Yafa, Haftarecha Kamocha, they should die quickly. Why don't we bring a lot of bundles of vines? They're highly flammable vines, Tuva, a lot of them. That she's going to die very quickly because it'll be an extremely hot fire, a lot of flame, a lot of fire. So Kamash Malan, that we rely on the Gzera Shava of Nadav and Avihu, that we burn her from the inside out. We pour molten lead into her throat to burn her from inside out. We don't bring a lot of vines from the outside and burn her inside. Now, if we remember, Sanhedrin Nun Beis Amud Beis, there was a Maisa that Rav Chama Bar Tuvia took a Bas Kohen and surrounded her with a lot of dry vines and burnt her up. It happens. They're in the Sanhedrin, Nun Beis Amud Beis. And they had a problem with it. They said, why did you do that for? You've made two mistakes. First of all, we don't burn a Bas Kohen with vines from the outside. We use the molten lead from the inside. Didn't you learn Pesachim Ayin Hay? And second of all, there was no Misas Bezdin anymore. There was no Misas Bezdin because there was no Bezdin. There was no Sanhedrin on the Temple Mount. So Rav Chama Bar Tuvia was much later on. How could you do that? So the Mefarshim there say it wasn't a real Misas Bezdin. It was a Horas Shah. It was something done because the time needed it, because it was like a one-off, because that particular generation and that particular place was tilting towards znus. And this was an action intended to shock the public away from that decline into znus, into adultery. And so he burned the Bas Kohen in fire, because that's the din. But he changed it up on purpose. He used the vines on purpose to show this wasn't a Misas Bezdin. It wasn't an official sanctioned Sanhedrin execution. It was actually a Horas Shah, and that's why he did the vines. So Rav Chama Bar Tuvia had an answer for his, according to the Mefarshim, had an answer for why he did that. But he did the vine method, but that's not an officially sanctioned method. Ela be'esh lamali, so why does the Torah say be'esh? Why we tisaref be'esh? If tisaref is good enough to execute the Bas Kohen, we burn her with molten lead. Why does it say be'esh? Lefuki ever me'karu. This excludes lead from its origin. Rashi says sometimes you would mine lead and it would be warm, it would be hot and already melting, already flowing. And it's a shtickle strange. It's a little bit strange, but it could be perhaps if it's near a geothermal vent, or it's near some hot materials in the earth, it could be melted. There's other mefarshim in the Koran, they bring down a note that perhaps this means meikaru is when you originally mine lead from the ground, it's mixed with all sorts of impurities. And it's not going to burn very well. It's not going to become molten because the lead is mixed in with other metals and other slag and other things. So we actually have to refine it to make this wick of lead in order to have a proper burning of the Bas Kohen. We can't just use the raw material we get out of the ground. Good, first wide line. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, Kol heicha dichsiv ba'esh tisarv. Is it true that everywhere it writes, in the fire you will burn, the rabbos kol sreifos, it includes any sreifos, habaus, machmas eish, anything hot that's been heated up by fire, like we said, by the mikvah, the burn by tzaras, and the Bas Kohen's execution with the hot lead. What about the bowls that we burn? Now, there's a few times we burn the bowls. There's a bowl chatas for the Kohen Gadol, who made a mistake, for the Sanhedrin, who made a mistake in Pesach, and on Yom Kippur, there is a par hanisraf, the par that goes bifnim, that we sprinkle the blood inside, and that one's entirely burnt up. And these are chatas, but they're special chatas that we burn the par entirely. A normal chatas of a normal animal, the Kohanim actually eat. Parts go on the mizbeach and parts are eaten, but these bowls are burned entirely. And it says, Ba'esh tisarv, dichsiv bahu, v'saraf oso, ala eitzim, ba'esh. It says you burn it, these bowls that are chataut, on the wood in the fire. Betanya and the Brisa explains, ba'esh v'lo besid, it has to be in a fire, v'lo besid roteach, and not with lime that's boiling, v'lo begipsid roteach, and not with gypsum that's boiling. And we understand not with these other hot items. Amarle hachi hashta. So here, take a look here. Chatam dichsiv be'esh. So there it writes be'esh v'hader tisarif, and then right after tisarif you burn it. The Rabbot kol sreifot says with fire you burn it. That would include, like we said by the Bas Kohen, anything that's heated up by fire or by the Yitzaras. Kol sreifot about machmadesh. Any sreifa that comes on account of fire. The fire heated up water, and that's created the michvah, created the burn, and that's a valid sarat. By these bowls that have to be burnt up entirely, it says you burn him on the wood in the fire. So instead of being eish to saref with the fire, we understand that be can mean in, it also mean with, or it can mean by means of. Ba'esh is not just in the fire, it could mean by means of fire. To saref, you burn it. Sarafoto ala eitzim ba'esh. Levasof, eish has eish at the end. The memra de eish in, it's davka with fire, midi acharini lo, and not with something else to heat it up by fire. Chasam name ktiva sreifa, levasof. So there too it writes sreifa at the end. Dichsiv, turning over to Amud Beis, al shefech hadesh and yisarif. It says by these bowls that are burned as a chatas, al shefech hadesh and yisarif. On the place you spill out the ash, that's where you burn it. Amrihahu yisarif mibaile. That yisarif we need to know. The Ketatani, like the Brisa explains, yisarif we burn it there on the place of the deshen, the place where we put the ashes from the mizbeach. Even if there's not ashes there right now, because you've already cleaned out all the ashes. That sometimes they would clean the ashes when there were a lot of them. Yisarif we burn it there. Yisarif afalpi shechetzitza or berubo. Even though the fire is already taken to the majority of this animal, we keep tending to the fire and stoking the fire to get it entirely consumed by eish. So it's all shefech hadesh and yisarif. We need this yisarif that we put it on the place of the deshen and we burn it with eish. Now the trumas deshen is interesting because the first avoda in the morning is taking a little bit of the ash off the mizbeach to this makom shefech hadeshen where we leave this, and it's a tremendous musar that our first avoda in the morning is sort of cleaning up from yesterday. We kind of take out the trash from yesterday. We want to clean up from yesterday and start the new day cleaned up. But it's also, it's a new day. We want a clean slate to start on. So we're thinking about yesterday. We're also thinking about starting a new day. You can always start the day off on the right foot with a new daf. So Baruch Hashem, we have a new daf every day for inspiration. Ravina Mar Krochatani. So put them together and teach them together. So we're combining tsaras and the case of the parim. Michvas eish, ainli elish nichva ba'eish, uva gechelis. We would only know from fire or from coals. Nichva beremitz. So what if it was hot ash? Besid roteach, or burning lime. Begifsid roteach, or boiling gypsum. Kol davar ba machmata or, anything that's been heated up by fire. Lesuya chamea or, even hot water, boiling water can cause a michva for tzras. Minayin, how do we know that's valid? Talmud lomar michva. It says burn twice. Riba, like we had in Amud Aleph. So anything heated up by fire can cause a michva for hilchos tzras. Rava compares, mi amar Rabbi gecholim ikru eish. Do we say that coals are eish? Because on Amud Aleph we didn't say gecholim, and here we're saying gecholim. Reminhu, I have a contradiction that coals are not fire, because by keturis, by the incense, going back to Nadav and Avihu, here's what you do for keturis. Gochale, you bring gochale eish, it's called, coals of fire. Pasuk is actually lakach melo machta, you take a full incense pan, gochale eish, coals of fire. That's what we're going to be dorish now. Me'ala mizbeach, from the Mizbeach, Malifnei Hashem, from the inner Mizbeach, Malochav Nav Ketoris, and the handful of Ketoris, Samim, Dakav Hevi Mi Beis Labrochas, and you bring it to the curtains. We saw that said we were learning about the avoda. This was one of the most difficult avodot in the mikdash because he has to hold the coal pan very carefully, and he has to take his right hand to do the kamitza to get the ketoris out while he's holding the fire pan, and he has to put them together. And then Yom Kippur, he would have to hold it in his mouth to take the 2 hands full of ketoris for Yom Kippur. So it's a very difficult avoda to be holding the hot coals and not spill a single drop of the ketoris. So gochale eish is what's written there, coals of fire. It says minhu gochale yachol omamos. You would have thought even smoldering coals, even coals that are black already, but they're still hot. Talmud lamar eish, it has to be eish, has to be open fire. E eish, if it's really a fire, yachol shel heves. You would think you need a flame, a really burning flame, not just hot coals. Talmud lamar gochale. Ha-ketzai, how can it be coals and fire? Those things are not the same. Maybe minalochashos, you bring from the whispering coals. I think the barbecue guys have a scientific term for this, but the coals that you understand, they're not smoldering, they're hotter than that. They're we say whispering is the translation here, but you can see like they're kind of flickering. They're flickering coals. They're still hot. They still have some fire inside the coal, even though the flame is not bursting out of the coal. V'haguva kasha. So this brisa itself is contradictory. Amrat, it says gochale, coals, yachal omimos. You would have thought even smoldering coals. Amalachashos eishninhu. This would say that flickering coals, the ones with fire inside, are really considered open fire and considered eish. A maseifa, eish. If the pasuk had only written eish, not gochale eish, yachal shaleves, you would have thought we need a really open flame. Tamalamar gochale. We need coals of flame. Alma afilu lochashos. So even whispering coals, these flickering coals, are laveshininu, are not a valid fire. Amrav Sheshes, Hachi Katani. This is what the brisa means. Gochale, coals of Yachol bein amamos bein lochashos. If it just said that, you would have thought either smoldering coals or whispering, flickering coals. Tamalamar Eish, so it says Eish, fire. Eish, if the pasuk only said fire, Yachol Shalavis, you need an open flame, we would have thought. Tamalamar Gochale, HaKetzad, coals of fire. How does that work? How do you bring these coals of fire for your ketzoris? Maybe minalachashos, you bring from the whispering coals, the flickering coals that are burning inside. Mikomakom gacholim lo ikru eish. So you see that coals are not called eish. And up above, you said by michvah, coals are considered eish to cause a burn. Kasha le Rebbe. This is a kasha to Rebbe who says, remember, you could cut your carbon pesach up and put it directly on the coals, not necessarily on a spit. Amar baye taretz hachi. Here's what we have to answer this by the Ketores. Gochale yachol omimos. What if that gacholim coals is even smoldering coals, velo lochashos, and not flickering coals? So the pasuk says eish also. Eish, if it said fire, yachol ratza shel heves yavi, ratza gehelis yavi. You would have thought you could bring open fire, or you could bring hot coals, burning coals. Talmar gochale haketzad. So what does he actually bring for his ketoris? Maybe minalochashos. He brings from these whispering coals, these coals with the fire inside. Amar Rabba, Ratza Gechelis Yavi, Ratza Shecheves Yavi. It could be that if he brings coals if he wants, or if he wants to, he could bring a flame itself. The Gemara asks, Shal Heves below Gechelis Hechesh B'Koch. How do you find a flame, a burning open flame, without coals, without a fuel source? There's no such thing. Could go, and they say there is such a thing. To Shafya Lemana Mishcha. You smeared the fire pan with oil. You put oil all over the pan, but no coals. And you lit that flame up. So now you have burning oil in the pan, but you don't have any coals. You don't have any firewood in there. That one you don't. Why would I need a pasuk to exclude that? To exclude just a burning pan of oil without any coals. We wouldn't put this before a human king. Rashi says because burning oil just by itself causes a lot of smoke, thick smoke, an annoying smell. It's not derech eretz. Again, of course, we wouldn't bring that to Hashem. Hashem, you understand, gets honor even more than a king. So you wouldn't bring this to a king. We have this concept by Bishul Akum. If it's Ole al Shulchan Malachim, a food is important if it would be served at a royal banquet or at a presidential reception or something like this, then we understand it's something important. So here too, we wouldn't bring this smelly, smoky oil without any fuel source before a king. Ele Amar Rava Tari Tzchachi. So Rava says, answer it like this: Gochale, coals of, and our Gochale Eish. Yachol Amimos. Would have thought even smoldering coals are good enough for burning your ketzoris. For lo lochashos, you wouldn't even need these flickering, whispering coals. Tam Lamar Eish, Gochale Eish. If it was a fire, you would have thought that when you scoop it off of the mizbeach, what do? You bring half coals and half fire. So you'd bring coals that the fire is leaping out of the coals. The flame is extant. It's rising out of these coals. But by the time you brought it in to offer the ketores, have kula gecheles. It's all going to be coals. If you scoop it up and it's coals with the fire rising out, by the time you march it over there into the base of Mikdash, into the Mizbeach Ketores, it's going to be all coals. Talmud Lamar, lakach meloa machta gochel eish. So the Torah actually tells you, you take a full fire pan of the gochel eish, the coals of fire, me'ala Mizbeach, that are on the Mizbeach. Mishas lakicha, at the time of taking the coals, nechave gocholim, they should be really coals. So what's going on is you're taking these coals that are what we call lochashos, whispering coals, flickering coals. You look at them and you see the fire in them. You see they're yellow and they're black and they're orange, and it's a beautiful sight to behold when you're making a barbecue. Ibailahu, we have a linguistic question. Omamos o omamos, mita aleph or mita ayin? And there's a nafkamina. It's not the same word. It's often pronounced the same word, but it's not the same word. So we have makbid on the ayin. Amar Yitzchak, he says there's a pasuk. The pasuk in Yechezkel, Arazim lo amamuhu, not amamuhu, but amamuhu. Began Elokim, Berushim, lo damu. I have the whole pasuk here. So he says these arazim, these cedars are not amamuhu. They're not whispering. They're not rustling in the wind. So we see it's mitan ayin. We have time. We're going to do the Mishnah. The next Mishnah is naga becharso. If you have your fire, your tzli eish is going on in an oven, and the ovens were usually cheres, were usually made of ceramic, and the carbon pesach touched the wall of the oven, naga b'charso, touched the cheres of the oven, shel tanar, yiklof, you peel off et mekomo, the place that the carbon pesach touched. You peel some of the meat or the skin off where it touched the oven. Because we saw yesterday in the Mishnah, it was a problem using metal, because if the metal is getting hot and is what's touching the meat, that would be an issue. That's why you use a wooden stick. So here it's touching the oven, and it's not getting sli eish from the fire, it's getting cooked from touching the wall of the oven, so we peel that part off, we don't eat it. Nataf merotvo, if some of the juice, the gravy, dripped out of the carbon pesach, ala cheres, onto the wall of the oven, the chazar, and then it fell off the wall of the oven, chazar alav, and it went back onto your carbon pesach, yitul es mekomo, you take the place. So this is different. Yiklof is just peeling off the outer layer. Notel is kedei netila, is 1 finger's width in. So this is actually halacha l'maisa. We say there's a difference between a klipa and a kedei netila. As we remember, all netilas yadayim is on our fingers. Netila, a yitul, is kedei netila is 1 finger. Nataf merotvo, if some of the sauce dripped out, the hot gravy dripped out ala solis on the fine flour that you have there, yikmots, you have to make a kmitza, scoop out esmekomo, the place it fell. Because you can't have this. It's gonna, the taste of your carbon pesach is gonna go into that flour. Sachu b'shem and truma. What if the anointed, they smeared, they basted your carbon pesach with truma oil? Now remember, only kohanim can eat truma, like Rabbi Tarfon taught us a couple days ago. Im chaburas kohanim yochelu. If they're all kohanim in the group, they could eat that thing with truma oil on it. Delicious. Im shel Yisrael. If there's Yisrael in the group. Im chayhu. If it's still raw, you haven't cooked it yet. Yedichenu. You can rinse it off. Im tzlihu, if it's already been roasted, yiklof esachitzon. You just have to peel off the outer layer where the oil was touching it, because it's truma. Israel can't eat it. Sachu b'shemen shel meiser. If he anointed it with meiser sheni oil, lo yaseinu damim al b'nei chabura. You can't charge the other members for meiser sheni. We don't buy and sell meiser sheni and do transactions with meiser sheni. We can eat it in Yerushalayim, which is good. We're eating our carbon pesach in Yerushalayim, fine. But if they basted with meiser sheni, then you can't charge everybody else for your Meiser Sheni oil. If one of the guys from the Chabura used his oil, you can't charge anybody else, because that's doing business with Meiser Sheni. She'ein podin Meiser Sheni b'Yerushalayim. We don't redeem Meiser Sheni in Yerushalayim. Now this comes up halacha l'maisa, where if you have yogurt on the top shelf of your refrigerator, and you have chicken right underneath, and the kids go in reaching for the orange juice, and they knock over the yogurt into the chicken. Now it makes a difference. As we see with our Paschal lamb, if that chicken underneath is raw, you just rinse it off, Rabbi Osai. All you do is rinse it off. Because you have cold chicken in the fridge, and it's raw. It hasn't been dried out by heating up yet. You just rinse that yogurt off your chicken. Shalom al Yisrael. What if the chicken's already cooked? So then, well, there's nafkaminas if it's spice, if it has cracks in it, the yogurt's falling in the cracks, you might have a bigger problem. If it's spiced, it might go in more as a bigger problem. But stam, if it's just cooked, then you have to be kolef. You have to peel off the outer layer because now that yogurt can absorb into the cooked chicken. You understand it's drier. Has more susceptibility for other things to absorb into it, as we see exactly by our Korban Pesach. I think this comes up more lamaisa in Eretz Yisrael, where they have milk in the bags in the little pitcher, then someone knocks it over onto the chicken. It's lamaisa, but here, there are nafkaminas between the kedei natila and the kedei klipa, or just simply rinsing it off if everything is cold and uncooked. So this mishnah is nogeya lamaisa for halacha lamaisa when we have spills in the refrigerator. Bosei shkoyach, pleasure.